After struggling mightily this season, Raptors head coach Darko Rajakovic finally made the decision to switch up the lineups with the team and put Scottie Barnes as the starting point guard. So, what does this mean for the Raptors going forward? And is this switch going to work and help the team win more games? Let's get into it. Welcome everybody, this is Amateur Hour Sports, the YouTube channel that is completely dedicated to providing you with Toronto Raptors news coverage and analysis in videos just like this, as well as live stream watch parties for every Raptors game. If you like what you see from today's video, be sure to hit that like button, help this video get to 150 likes, but also show your support to the channel. And if you find yourself enjoying along the way, you want to see more Raptors content just like it, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We're getting very close to 16,000 subs, and you can help us reach that milestone. But yes, a change in the starting lineup. Dennis Schroder was taken out of the starting five. Gary Trent Jr. was inserted into the starting five. But what that meant for Scottie Barnes was he was the starting point guard for the team and had to take on an even bigger ball handling and offensive initiation role for the team in the recent 30-point victory over the Washington Wizards. So we're going to be covering what the lineup looked like from a starting sense, but also the changes that it actually provided to the Raptors bench and the differences that perhaps could be positive to the team going forward. But on top of the changes we saw to the lineups, we need to discuss as well if it's going to work going forward, and perhaps what does Darko Rajakovic need to do to ensure that this lineup works going forward, because this was a good way to test it out. This was a good way to see just exactly what these lineups are going to look like, with Scottie Barnes as the point guard to start, with Gary Trent at the 2, OG Anunoby at the 3, Pascal Siakam at the 4, and Jakob Poeltl at the 5. Yes, it worked very well, but it was only the Washington Wizards here. The Wizards are 5-24 now, 5-25 on the season. But hey, you can only beat what's in front of you. If you're going to test out a new strategy, you're going to work out the kinks on the fly over the course of 48 minutes. Perhaps a good opportunity to do that is against those Washington Wizards. And for the majority of the game, the Raptors were just in complete control of it. And I think it's chalked up mostly to not necessarily the starting five, but just the fact that for the full course of the 48 minutes, I was just much happier seeing the lineups out there. There was no point in the game in which I was questioning the lineups that were in place against the Wizards. I wasn't looking at a five-man set on the court and thinking, what is Darko Rajakovic thinking? With so many other games this season, that's exactly what's been the case, because not only do we have a starting five with a bit more spacing, with a bit more involvement from Scottie Barnes, and naturally a bit more involvement from Pascal Siakam, who all of a sudden became the secondary ball handler for the team, but with these bench units, yes, Darko cannot shake wanting to go with 4 bench players and 1 starter on the floor at once, the 4+1 lineups, but at least in these 4+1 lineups, Dennis Schroder is now in the 4, and we now have this offensive penetration that we didn't have previously in these bench sets, these bench units. Dennis Schroder provided a ton of assists in that game against the Washington Wizards, and I thought what was great about the switch here, Dennis Schroder seemed to take it in stride and really honed in on his role as the offensive initiator, the playmaker here, and wasn't taking on a ton of difficult shots, which he had been doing so often over the course of this season thus far. But having Dennis Schroder with those 4 bench guys, and then using either Barnes or Siakam as the starter in those 4-man units, I would still prefer to have 2 starters on at all times, but if you are going to use it this way, this is a pretty good way to go about it. The Raptors also would use Chris Boucher, Otto Porter Jr., and they added in Jalen McDaniels just to have more of like a 5-man lineup, 5-out lineup in place here. Jakob Poeltl wasn't as necessary in this game because the Wizards just don't quite have the bigs to combat the Raptors like perhaps other teams would. So Darko exploited this, and he recognized the matchups, and he recognized where the Raptors could gain advantages, and playing with people who could switch on defense and who could play on the perimeter on offense really worked for this team. And for the course of the 48 minutes, it wasn't like we had to navigate these bench minutes and the stars had to come in and save the game once again. We did not have that here. But again, it is the Washington Wizards, so we need to also be kind of critical of what the Raptors actually employed on the court to try and make these things work, because I think that just for the sake of it, just for making the change here, I think with the change, we saw things that actually began to work for this team, and that started to make sense. And that just allowed the Raptors and the talented players that they have on their team, like Siakam and Barnes, it allowed them to play a little bit more of their style and play with a bit more freedom. And all of these things really contributed to the victory and the success against the Wizards. But what is going to happen when we see the Raptors against a better team, like perhaps the next game up, which is against the Boston Celtics? Well, now we're really going to challenge ourselves and have a real measuring stick sort of performance to see, okay, The lineup switch makes sense. Positionally, it does make sense. However, we need to be a bit better with schemes. Because a lot of the time in that game, it felt like Darko just made the switch because of the pressure from the media, perhaps from other sources. Like, he just felt as though it was a pressure decision. We saw his press conference after the Utah Jazz game where the Raptors blew a big fourth quarter lead, a double-digit fourth quarter lead to the 11-18 Utah Jazz, and he did not seem like a man who wanted to change the lineup in that post-game press conference. Perhaps pressure came on him to make that switch. That's the only reason he did it. But the switch, we saw the glimpses of it making sense. We saw Scottie Barnes with more space on the inside. We saw Scottie Barnes in the pick and roll game now with an opportunity to drive and kick to actual shooters. He would get the screen from Pirtle. He'd come off the screen. He'd drive to the rim. A double would come. What do you know? OG Anunoby, a 40% three-point shooter, is open. What do you know? Gary Trent Jr., a typical 38% three-point shooter, is open for catch and shoots. And Gary Trent looked better as a starter once again for this Toronto Raptors team. So the spacing was there, more consistent lineups were there, but ultimately when you're playing a better defense, what Darko kind of failed to do in this one was adjust schematically and make the correct schemes for the Raptors on offense. We saw that a little bit in the first half. The Wizards were still able to take away a bit of our game. They put Avdija at the point of attack against Scottie Barnes. Avdija is a good defender, and Barnes was my worry for Barnes going to the season, why I didn't really want Barnes to be the point guard for this team. We've seen such a tremendous boost in his three-point shooting, which is absolutely massive to him playing in that position. However, what we're not quite getting enough of is the tight ball handling to break that initial point of attack just to get the defense moving. I think honestly, it looks much better in this state with this lineup, absolutely 100%. But that's just a kink that we're going to have to work out. And if that ball handling stuff doesn't come this season, and my goodness, we've seen the astronomical increase in Scottie Barnes' productivity this season, I imagine that the ball handling will come at some point. It's just not quite there yet. So what we did to maneuver that in the second half a bit more was Scottie Barnes didn't play as the lead ball handler oftentimes in the half court. That role went to Siakam, who is a very good offensive initiator, very good at beating the point of attack, and an underrated passer, and he showcased that with 11 assists in that win over the Wizards. But better teams like the Celtics will be able to take these away. They'll have better rotations on defense, probably a more engaged team. So Darko's just going to have to do a bit more to try and beat that first defender, break down that point of attack, break down the defense, get the defense moving, get that first offensive penetration. Things in which he's going to be able to do this perhaps are high pick and rolls for Scottie Barnes. Players can, yes, go under that screen. I mean, the pull-up jumpers have been there, maybe not enough to force defenders to avoid hedging those screens, going under those screens to take away Scottie Barnes' lane. They're going to have to perhaps start to maybe consider going over those screens, which would give Scottie Barnes a lane. But I mean, then it's pick your poison. You want Scottie Barnes driving with an open lane, or would you prefer if he has to take a semi-contested jump shot? So give him those high pick and rolls and give him that runway. Give him more space to get a full head of steam to get to the rim, and that's just where you're going to see Scottie Barnes thrive when he has to make those decisions. Give him the options as he's going inside. As well as Scottie Barnes performing this role, you can have Pascal Siakam as well performing this role with the ball in his hands, driving at the rim. But even so, with the starting lineup, you didn't really see a ton in the starting lineup altogether. The minutes were staggered a little bit better here. You had a lot of times Barnes still playing with Schroder, so Schroder was a point guard. Barnes was still the secondary ball handler in those sets. But overall, I think that this is a decision from Darko that was obvious, but makes sense. I think that now Raptors fans can watch this team and can buy into the system that is in place a little bit more. I don't have to watch games and think what are we doing? What are we even trying to do? It doesn't even make sense what we have here. So it makes watching games so difficult because you're not believing things are going to work. There is belief that this can work. Yes, there are some drawbacks. Yes, there are some cons to doing this. You still have the 4+1 lineups. You still have Barnes as the main offensive initiator in the half court, which is still something that is a work in progress for now. But honestly, what's the worst case scenario of this thing going on? Best case, obviously, the system works. You start to win more basketball games. Worst case, if it's not really working as well as Barnes, the point guard, you're still getting a good case scenario because Barnes is going to have the ball in his hands a ton. I look back to Giannis Antetokounmpo's rookie season. He played a lot of point guard because the Bucks were trying to get him used to the NBA, get the ball in his hands as much as possible, let him learn on the fly. This is worst case, what we're going to do with Scottie Barnes. That's a pretty good case scenario as well, because if this is not working really as well, you're still getting the ball in Scottie Barnes' hands a ton, and you're still working on his development strides a ton, and you're really going to see, can this point guard thing work? We've always wondered, can it really work with Barnes at point guard? Well, hopefully over the course of the season, if this remains intact and this starting five remains intact, Scottie Barnes will be a point guard, and we will see how good he can look in that position. So if that's the worst case scenario, there's a lot of sense to making this decision. However, from Darko's perspective, am I going to give him a ton of credit? Well, look, credit, he made the gutty decision to take his guy Dennis Schroder out of the starting five. We knew this was the obvious thing that he needed to do to the team to shake things up and to see things a little bit differently and to have different lineups that made a bit more sense. So we'll give him a little bit of credit there, but where I still need to see improvement from a coaching perspective is what are the schemes going to look like when you're playing an actual defense that can provide some resistance to those Scottie Barnes driving kicks, those Pascal Siakam driving kick opportunities, because the Boston Celtics will provide a lot more. So again, big measuring stick performance, but a very good step in the right direction with the team that we have here and the lineups that we now have in place. So what do you make of Scottie Barnes, the point guard, and the decision to put in Gary Trent to the starting five? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, because that's all for me for today. Smash that like button if you did enjoy what you saw from this video. It does support the channel a ton, and subscribe for more Raptors content just like this. I'll see you again very soon for another video.